This will be an introduction to a quick flow through Pryme Matters, all-in-one matter management software for law firms and accounting firms on Business Central. We'll go through the steps of intake assessment, creating a new matter, tracking of cost on the matter, matter invoicing, and reporting. The first part of the process will be a compliance assessment. This is part of the intake process. We can open the client assessment, and from there we can create a new client assessment. The client assessment consists of two parts. There can be a conflict of interest search and a know your client part. We'll start with the conflict of interest part, from where we will run the conflict of interest check. In the conflict of interest check, we can search for different entities, names of companies, and other legal entities. And by searching for these, we will get a number of results for where this name or this number appears in our historical data. In this case, we solved for worldwide, and we found that we have a previous contact with a worldwide bank. And in this case, there is a relation to a trademarks case where the worldwide bank was the opposing party. And then the question becomes, is this a conflict of interest or not? In order to facilitate that assessment, we provide additional data about the matters and the history, the status of the matter, who's responsible, etc. When did it start? When did it end? And that allows you to make an assessment and either approve or reject. In this case, I'll approve everything because this might not be relevant for our case. We're looking for another client. And in this case, we get an approved status on the conflict of interest search. For the know your client part, there are two ways to do this. It can either be based on a connection to another system where you will do the checking of AML, PEP lists, beneficiary owners, sanctions, etc. And then you will get that result back into Business Central. The other option is to use a manual checklist where you, for each of the steps, can do your checking and mark each of these as either approved or rejected. And this list of steps is, of course, something that can be defined. In the end, we get a final status of either approved or rejected. When the entire compliance assessment is done, then we close the assessment, and it can no longer be changed. It will be part of the history for that client and that matter for all eternity. And so it becomes part of the audit trail. To create a new matter, we will use a guided experience. We have a quick matter guide. In here, we provide a description for the new matter. So that could be ongoing questions. We select a template, and the template defines the setup of the matter, what tasks are included, what are the rules for posting, etc. I'll select one of my templates. Then I'll select a client from my list of clients. And I will select who will be responsible for the matter. I can also add dimensions from the general list of Business Central dimensions. And I can add in a referral if this was a matter that was referred by another company that we have some kind of relationship to. After creating the matter, there is an optional screen where you can specify any rules for commission on this matter. We support different kinds of commission. That could be a fee earner commission, but it could also be an acquirer commission. And this is what you would specify here. Who is the acquirer of this case or this matter? In this case, we could say that it was Connie who acquired the client to 100%, but it might have been another person who was the acquirer of the matter. And all this will then go into the calculation of the commission. After creating the matter using the guide, we get to the matter plan. The matter plan has three main areas. There's a head area with some general information. We have a list of the tasks that are related to the matter, or where we can track time and cost. In this case, it was a very simple setup, so we only have a few tasks where we can track the time. But this can of course be as complicated or as elaborate as you would need. In some kinds of matters, such as insolvency, there would probably be a long list of different tasks to be performed. On the right-hand side, we see different fact boxes. We have deadlines where we can put in deadlines for different things that happen through the life cycle of the matter. That could be court dates, that could be other dates where something needs to be submitted or performed by. And each of the deadlines can also be the generator of a reminder to the person responsible in order to make sure that they have completed that task. We can add invoicing instructions if there are special instructions to be given at the time of invoicing. That could be any kind of rule that cannot be put in as a hard and fast financial rule. So that could be something like a maximum spend limit or any other special rule. And we can add a long text describing what are the rationale behind this. And this text will appear when we get to invoicing. We can add associations, where associations are relations to outside parties. So that could be an opposing party, an agent, an insurance company, any other party which is relevant to this matter. In this case, I'll select another company as the opposing party, and that will be our association. This will later be used for the conflict of interest search for future matters. We can also define a team of people who will work on this matter in the matter team members window, and we can define securities, any kind of documents of value that we want to track on this matter, and we want to make sure that we return to the client before closing the matter. In the header section here, we also see we have our client's funds balance, which will be updated as we receive funds from the client. We can also do reporting of that. We have a number of reports in the system that we can use for that, such as a statement of client funds or client funds per client responsible. When a new matter is set up, it is possible to define a budget for that matter. That is an optional process. We can go in using our budget matrix and define that we will set aside a number of hours for this matter. In this case, I will do it for a resource group, and I will select my resource group of lawyers. And I will say for this that in May, we set aside 100 hours. This is now our budgeted amount for this matter. And of course, it can be split up into multiple parts. That budget is of course converted into an expected cost based on the rate cards we have for different groups of people. And we will track this over time as we incur cost on the project. This also allows us to get warnings. So we have an option in here to set an alert level. At what level of usage do we want to get an alert? And would we like to get an email alert sent out when we have exceeded the threshold? There are multiple other settings that we can have for a matter. One of those could be on the matter card. We can see that we have the possibility to define a client split for scenarios where a matter needs to be paid by multiple parties. We can go in and define that this matter will be paid in part by a datum corporation. They will pay 30%, and Trey Research will pay 70%. And we can have an unlimited number of parties paying for this. This will mean that all future invoices will be split according to the percentages defined. This needs to be activated by using the Use Client Split feature. To make it easier to track time on a matter like this, we can define a default time entry task. And I have defined that the general task is the default, This means that whenever somebody tracks time on it, unless they select anything else, time will go on to task number 10, meaning the general task, and anything else needs to be specifically selected. Next up, we have tracking of costs on the matter. The main costs on matters are, of course, the time, and we record the time on timesheets. On the timesheet, there are multiple options. One is to select who the client is. In this case, it was Trey Research. And as I select that, it automatically selects the matter I have for Trey Research, as I only have one. It also selects the general task because we set that up in the matter as a default task. And the only thing I need to select is the quantity and the description of the work. There is an option to also select a work type if you need to separate the work into different work types, but that is an optional field and it can be hidden. In this case, I will say that we spend 2 hours on work, and then I can add a description of what the work was. That might be something as meeting with somebody. Now, if the description field is not big enough to write a longer description, we can always go into the extended description field and enter the description down here where there's a lot more space. We allow up to about a full page of text, which in most cases are plenty. There is also an option to add standard text. So I can have predefined text as my description. I can simply go in and select, I would like to have the agreement text. And then it fills that in with a predefined text where I might need to fill in some details in order to complete this. We can even add rules where we say there are certain words that we do not allow. So I could put in here, if this is, let's say, admin work, we see here that the word admin is highlighted, and that's because it is a flagged word that I want to make sure that people don't use unless they have a good reason to use it. And I even get a warning for this. I can also do time tracking within the timesheet with a start-stop functionality. This only works if you're tracking time on the current day, which of course you should. It is today Tuesday, so if I select Tuesday, I can see that I get a start button. And so again, I could select my customer and I can then push the start button and it will start a timer which will track how much time I spend. When I've done with whatever task I'm performing, I can go in, I can press stop, and it tracks the time I've spent. In this case, it was only a few seconds, but we see that it rounded off, and the rounding rules are of course something that you can define. You can also track time in other places, like the mobile client or directly in Outlook. When tracking Outlook, you can do that in either calendar or from emails. I'll show it for a calendar appointment. I press my time tracking button and this opens up the time tracking screen within Outlook, where I can select the matter and the task directly. Both date and quantity fill in automatically. And the timesheet is instantly updated. I can also use the time tracking start-stop timer functionality directly, tracking multiple time entries at the same time. So even if I'm working on one piece of work, I could start another timer at the same time and simply say I'm also working on something else at the same time. So I track multiple pieces of work at the same time. And of course I can start them and stop them again multiple times. So I get a cumulative time. You can also track time from Outlook by importing into the time tracking. In this case, you can do it either for the complete period or for a single day. This will pull in whatever you have in your calendar, and then you can adjust that accordingly and decide what needs to go onto the timesheet. If you want to have a visual presentation of this, you can use the time tracking calendar and see what your day looks like and what gaps there are. If you want to adjust any of this, you can of course do that with drag and drop and move things around, adjust them accordingly. And you get a nice summary of the time tracked and the time expected on the side. In the end, we have a timesheet that I can submit. When the timesheet is submitted, there is a possibility to have an approval process. I have not activated the approval process, but if there's a need, there can be an up to 3-step approval process for the time. If the timesheet is not submitted on time, there will be a reminder sent out that looks something like this, with the details of the time already reported, what is the time expected, and possibilities to either review and adjust or submit the timesheet now. Invoicing is of course an important area. I will use our invoice creation functionality to list all the matters that I'm currently working with. I can select one of the matters and see the details of what could be invoiced at the current point in time. For this matter, I can see that we have some invoicing instructions, and I can see some totals of the number of hours per individual and what amount we will invoice for that. And we of course also see the totals. I can make changes to the entries here, either remove something saying it is not approved. I can also change the chargeability if something should not have been chargeable. I can decide to do a write-off of some of the time by closing the line. We can see that that says the invoice to quantity to 0. And of course, I can change the actual number of hours to invoice on the individual line, saying this entry of our 8 hours, we can only invoice 6 hours for. And we can also change the description either to something more correct if needed, and we can still use the functionality to get standard descriptions, etc. Then we create the invoice. And we now have a draft invoice. With the template I selected for the matter, we get an aggregated invoice with just one single line for all the time spent on this matter, in this case 131 hours. If needed, we can adjust the total price for this using a prorated price adjustment. Here we see for each of the individuals how much is the time that they spent worth, and then we can revalue that either as an increase or a decrease. So I could change the value here to be 15,000, which means that I get an upright of just over 10%. I could also do that on the individual level if I wanted to adjust individually. And so after my prorated change, the total comes out to 15,000. I can then post the invoice. Here I have a need for an approval, so I send off this for approval. And when it comes back, then I can do the posting of the invoice. The posted invoice can of course be sent out using the standard functionalities of Business Central document profiles, so electronic invoices, PDFs, emails, printed, etc. What we get in the end will be 2 documents. One will be the invoice itself with the totals, and secondly, there can be a specification as a secondary page to this that includes the details of the time spent on this matter. We can print the invoice specification and see the complete specification of all the time spent by individual. The specification can be configured to show quantities or not, by resource or not, etc. If we go back to the matter plan, we'll see that all data is updated instantly. And we can now see how much is left to invoice. This time from the matter plan, where you also have the option of creating an invoice. Once it's been invoiced, we can see there's nothing left to invoice. But we can see what was previously invoiced. Click to see the details of the invoiced entries. So we have different ways to report. We have our resource time analysis, where we can look at a certain period of time, either for the entirety of the company or for a subselection of resources or departments. And we see the expected number of hours for each of the individuals. How many actual hours do we have? What is the utilization? How many hours have we invoiced? How much is internal time? How much is absence? And the usage that we have not yet invoiced for this period as well. There are also options to show additional columns for the year-to-date values. And we have the same for the resource amount analysis, where we're looking at amounts instead of the number of hours, but with the same system of looking at what is the expectation of how much will be invoiced, what was actually invoiced for the period, how much of that percentage-wise, the actual time spent, valued at the rate expected, and here we also have the year-to-date of the average price. We also have the client engagement report, where we can look at a specific matter or all the matters for a certain client or for a certain client responsible. We can open that up here and show for just one matter. And we can see that we get all the details of what time we've spent, how much of that was invoiced, at what rate, did we give any discounts, did we do any adjustments, on what invoice did that time appear. And of course, that all totals up on an individual basis as well.